But you know,
I've been to Fargo, but only in the summer.
got off the train for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Huge town.
Like you're a little.
No, I'm not.
I'm still lobbying.
I'm still loving for friends.
Yeah.
Like, I had to pay for
Some sort
time.
I mean, the session. Mark,
Well, welcome to our March 6th, 2025 meeting. I'm going to starting at about 7. Yeah. And we're live streaming the meeting on NVTC's YouTube channel. Please remember to speak up so the audience can hear us, and obviously welcome to all the members of the public that are with us tonight. And so we have confirmed that we do have an in-person forum. Now, the first thing that we want to deal with is Commissioner Ms. Bagley is requesting that basically virtually for personal reasons. She is out of state on business travel in North Dakota, is it? North Dakota. So, can I have a motion to approve Ms. Bagley's request? So any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. That motion passes, and welcome, Sarah. So opening remarks. The one comment that I want to make tonight is how much we owe our state legislative delegation. They're able to join us, and they've done really good work for the region and the entire country. So I want to especially thank and recognizing all the members of our legislative delegation. And I want to thank Tiffany, the DRPT leader, for her work as well. So being a Dillon Rule state and a state in which we need to work with Richmond on a regular basis, we couldn't ask for better people to be in those positions. So thank you all for that. Kate, do you want to speak to the room's Wi-Fi and also let us know if we received any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think, as I mentioned, maybe to a handful of folks coming around, we were trying to ensure we've got adequate bandwidth to be able to live stream. We had some challenges last month, and we definitely want to make it easier. One of the things that we're asking is that I know I have to do the same thing, is if your phone is automatically connecting to Wi-Fi, go ahead and disconnect if you can. Obviously, if you absolutely need to be connected to Wi-Fi, you're welcome to do that. But we're trying to see if that actually frees up some of the bandwidth as we work with our building to make sure that we've got the ability to live stream uninterrupted because of that. So thank you for that. And Mr. Chair, we do not have any public comments this evening, so we can continue on that.
Okay, thanks a lot. Moving right along, the minutes of January 16, 2025, NVTC meeting. We have last month's minutes before us for action. Can I have a motion to approve the January 16 minutes? Any discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? And we heard Ms. Bagley voting in favor. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is we have a consent agenda, a few items on it. I've asked Kate if she would to quickly summarize those items.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Indeed, we have 3 items on our consent agenda. The first is the annual state grants to DRPT that NVTC does each year on behalf of our jurisdictions. The second item is a direction to WMATA to allocate the funding the additional funding that we received from the Commonwealth, make sure that they allocate it the same way as they allocate it in the other ways that they do our regional funding. And finally, the last one is to authorize for me to award a contract to our creative services contractor. This commission provided an RFP for approval a couple months ago. Creative services is actually the ability to print our reports and do graphics layouts and things like our logo. And so those are the 3 things that are on the consent agenda.
Thank you very much. Does anyone know if any of these items be removed? Okay, not seeing any, request to do that, then I have a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda.
Moved.
For a second. Second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? I do not think unanimously, and certain I will also vote for the consent agenda. Next item is the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority. We're fortunate to have board member Spedler here tonight to give a board report. I was not able to be here since the last board has a budget work session. And then following Paul's presentation and any discussion with Paul, then we'll recognize Monica and Chair Walter, who will follow with his report. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. Metro's revised fiscal year 26 proposed budget and capital improvement program was released this past Thursday. We've seen really strong ridership and revenue growth this year. And this was before the return or the federal return to office mandates. So this revised budget anticipates a $20 million increase in passenger revenue related to the original budget. As a result, we are able to use $20 million less in preventative maintenance transfers by shifting those expenses back to the operating budget. This helps extend the debt capacity of the dedicated capital funding. Under this revised budget, Metro identified $440 million in additional funding capacity in the 6-year capital improvement program, thanks to the fiscal year 25 performance, cost savings across various program areas, reduced overhead and administrative expenses. This additional capacity will enable more progress in critical state of good repair needs like rail tracks, track rehabilitation, and passenger facilities. As we work through this budget process, I want to remind everyone of the significant work that the Metro team has put into play to identify cost savings and ways to grow revenues. There was a press release last month that highlighted over $500 million in cost savings just the past 2 years. We've heard the need for cost containment, and I'm proud that the Metro team has really stepped up to that call. On Monday, Metro staff commenced the first phase of the Better Bus implementation. Starting with new bus signs in Virginia, our team will be replacing 7,000 signs in the next 3 months as we gear up for the official launch on June 29th. Internally, there has been a significant push over the last month as we train bus operators and handle all the behind-the-scenes work that will enable the successful launch of the Better Bus network this summer. Keep an eye out later this month as Metro staff briefs the board on upcoming public outreach activities that will be taking place this spring. I want to remind everyone that this summer's planned track work on the Blue Line, first announced just over a year ago, the Franconia, Springfield, and Van Dorn stations will be closed from July 5th through the 26th, with free shuttle service operating during that period. Additionally, on the Yellow Line, we will have weekend single tracking between Braddock Road and Huntington on July 12th through the 13th and July 19th and 20th. This critical work will update train control rooms, replace obsolete signaling systems, and repair track and lighting infrastructure. In your materials, you'll find updates on Metro's strategic transformation plan, service excellence and talented teams reports, and new safety initiatives. 2 items worth mentioning are the enhanced bus fare enforcement strategies and a proposed banning program, which would prevent repeat and egregious offenders from accessing the WMATA system. While fare evasion on Metro Rail has dropped over 82%, we have work to do on the bus side. We're seeing good progress with over 2,000 people deterred from fare evading as of late January, thanks to stronger enforcement at key locations. We've also seen crime rates drop significantly by 40% over the last year, and we're working hard to continue that progress. 2 weeks ago, the NVTC WMATA committee asked for an update on return to office statistics and recent ridership trends. There are a few resources in your materials, but I'll note that Metro is continuing to see increases in ridership across the system. Now we've seen 46 consecutive months of year-over-year ridership growth, and several stations throughout the system are pushing 30 to 40,000 daily trips. So those are, and some of those stations are, those are records. In fact, that's even higher than pre-pandemic. You may have seen news last week that the Huntington North Garage is closed for a period of time due to structural repair or in need of serious structural repairs. These repairs will address the garage's fire suppression system, as well as some rehabilitation work. While a completion date has not been announced, another garage remains open and available at the Huntington station. Last cherry blossom season is right around the corner. Metro announced last week plans for additional trains, buses, and staff making them available to accommodate the hundreds of thousands of visitors to our region. We've also had a special train and bus route to celebrate, in addition to the special edition smart card. If all goes to plan, we're hoping for our first combined 1 million trip day since the onset of the pandemic. So a lot of progress in Metro continues. And also we're preparing for World Pride as well, which is starting mid-May through the first weekend of June. Still anticipated that close to 3 million people will be in town. There's a task force that's working on all that, including safety and transportation issues. So there we go. A lot covered there, but wanted to give you a broad overview of all the things happening.
Mr. Chair, I want to bridge some further questions. Yes. Yes, thanks, Paul, for the update. And I mean, and it's good to see that there's actually an increase in ridership even before the return to office. Has there been any rumors or indications that the Fed, based upon the help we're doing now, is going to discontinue the reimbursement of fares for federal employees for using metros?
Not that I've heard. Have you heard anything? I haven't heard anything.
Okay.
Director, I mean, I haven't. Yeah.
Thanks. Any other questions for Paul? That's a really great report. Thanks. Yes, please.
Are we still on track to start rolling out in May the universal tap for Metro so that we can move the credit cards and whatnot? I know that would have been the goal.
I don't think it's ready quite yet. I know they're going to be testing it in a few stations, but it is on track. And what complicates it for us is we're not single fare.
Yeah, very.
And the software we have and the hardware, I mean, this is a
Oh,
challenge
I
all the
know.
systems had. New York was easy because it's flat fare, but they still had challenge system with the system, software system. But we can do it. It's just going to take time to get there, and we think that'll really help. Especially with visitors.
Yeah.
Chairman, there's a quick question. This is just maybe more of a, for the future to discuss, but next year is the semi-quincentennial, and there's going to be a lot of tourism in Washington, DC and throughout the region. And I remember the bicentennial and the cool Metro cards for the bicentennial, but I don't know if you're thinking about the increased traffic and everything else and the hoopla around it, but it's just maybe something that they start to put on your radar.
Yeah, they have a whole team, Paul, that
They're working on.
they've got a whole calendar that goes out every 2 or 3 years, and all the major events, and they work with all the various federal groups and the law enforcement folks and our
I'd love to
marketing
know more
folks.
about it. Maybe we could push it out on our social media.
Any other questions?
You asked about, you mentioned Paul, the North Garage at Huntington.
Yeah.
It's been out for many years, not just recently. The north one's on South King, on North King Highway.
I thought that was.
That's the South Garage.
Yeah, the south.
Oh, the south?
The south, yeah.
So
No, the north is still open, yeah.
So the
Or
newest
the
one,
other lot is, yeah.
the newest one is the big one, which is 20 years old. The other ones go back to the beginning of time.
I guess I could use a process update on Metro's budget, like revised, I was just looking, it's so recent. Finalization and revisions over the next 2 months. It's a moving target with return to office and you want to be fiscally conservative. But just curious if you know, maybe it's just for me a reminder as to, will there be further revisions? Or is there a date, general timeframe when there might be further revisions before adoption?
Well, we won't make any changes to service. I mean, we've already had the public hearing. I mean, there could always be changes to the budget, as you know, until it's approved. Generally, the budget, as you see it now, is the one that will likely move forward. We have to be done by a certain period of time because there are federal grants and deadlines that we have to meet. So, you know, I would suspect, you know, by mid-April, probably.
Thank you.
Yes, Walt?
Yeah, just to amplify something Paul mentioned, kind of in passing, in terms of cost management and modernization. I got the chance to tour a couple of Metro facilities last month, including Carmen Turner, the training facility. And there's a really amazing story that is underway right now. I don't think it's getting a whole lot of attention, but the modernization that's going on, that's improving efficiency. It actually is, in many cases, bringing down costs or managing costs. And what's planned is really, I mean, frankly, WMATA is a little bit behind on modernization. So we're kind of in a catch-up period, but it's going to result in really performance improvements, and the cost management strategies are now looking realistic in large part because of the modernization. It's really amazing.
Yeah, I run Metro pretty often. Service reliability, really fantastic when they comes. So well done. Anybody?
And they're also on the red line, the automation trial is still going on, and you know, people's rides. I know it doesn't may not sound like much, but it's by cutting by 2 minutes. Safety issue, you know, so it's all much better. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, not seeing any. Next we'll hear from Kate about some related developments, particularly the move of the SJ 28. Comments from our legislators.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just because it's been a while since we met, and I know that we have many members of our general assembly, I just give it a little bit of background, then I know I'll be turning over to Mr. Alcorn to talk specifically about the work at our robotic committee, and then Mr. Aguirre to talk about our legislative committee. But just as a reminder, this calendar year is really a big year for what's intended to be a lot of progress for making the case for sustainable funding for WMATA, but also VRE and our local bus systems. So DMV Moves is the joint effort that's done by COG, just as a reminder, in WMATA, and it's really taking a look at the greater Washington DC area, so that's DC, Maryland, Virginia, and very much is about developing a vision for public transit as a whole in that large area, identifying an actual need assessment, so a dollar amount for the greater Washington DC area, and then establishing a framework agreement for how WMATA should be funded across those three jurisdictions. So we do expect that DMV Moves is going to be adopting recommendations that are going to touch on these areas, but also then touching some things related to improving the customer experience. There's some smaller groups that are working on that, so that's also part of that. So the DMV Moves, you think of that as being the greater regional scale. SJ 28 is the joint subcommittee that I know we have several members here we're on, and that is really intended to be the deep dive for anything that's really going to be happening in the General Assembly in the future. So again, all of these things are working very closely together. We at a staff level are working behind the scenes with the staff, both at WMATA as well as folks Nick Donahue, who I think most of us know is facilitating DMV Moves. We are having a lot of conversations with him to ensure that we're understanding in the SJ 28 work that's chaired by Mr. Evan, vice chaired by Mr. Sickles, is all going to be in alignment. So when we talk about the folks who are around the table, we actually have incredibly good representation. Paul Smedberg and Delegate Sickles, and Matthew Parenti are all on DMV Moves. Paul Smedberg is also, and Delegate Sickles are also on SJ 28, along with Senator Evans and Mr. Alcorn. So again, we've got really good representation by the commission on those two bodies. So again, right now, they are refining their cost estimates for both WMATA as well as the region as a whole. We do expect information to be shared at their task force meeting on March 24th. That is a public meeting. And again, a meeting that's going to be currently chaired by Mr. Smedberg. And SJ 28 is going to be reconvening in April. Those dates are just being figured out right now to really outline the work that's necessary ahead so that there can be recommended legislative actions in the future General Assembly sessions. So for this commission, we anticipate there will be some strategic timelines for the commission to be taking action on whether endorsing or providing feedback on both DMV Moves as well as SJ 28. I'm anticipating something in the spring, which is, or it's a kind of a little bit amorphous, but it really depends on the timeline of those, as well as again in the fall. And again, for those who may not have been at the January meeting, and just a reminder, the commission did pass a framework resolution that provides sort of a, truly it is a framework, a high level overview of the things that the commission cares about as these discussions go forward. We do plan on using things like resolutions, focused resolutions moving forward, provide this commission's feedback again on DMV Moves as well as SJ 28. So I know that's a lot, but I want to kind of ground folks on what's happening. There'll be a lot of things that are going to be brought likely through the Legislative and Policy and WMATA Joint Committee and then to this commission. So there's hopefully lots of opportunity for all of the commissioners to engage so they can be fair.
Thank you. Any questions for Kate or any of the participants in those initiatives? Additional comments or any questions anyone wants to make on those topics? Not seeing any. So now I'll turn it over to Walter Alcorn, Chair of NVTC's WMATA Committee. And then I'll be followed by Ken, and I'll be the Chair of NVTC's Legislative and Policy Committee for their reports.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick report from me. The WMATA Committee and the Legislative and Policy Committee, we did meet on February 20th. We got several updates on SJ 28, DMV Moves, and also a joint work plan for the two committees to work through the calendar year 2025. So the plan, as we have been doing, is to continue to meet together the WMATA Committee and the Legislative and Policy Committee because our primary issues are related to transit funding and the legislative challenges facing that issue. So I think we all that activity. So we do have a handout tonight. There is an online tutorial, and you should have in front of you this QR code, but also there's a website. Basically, this is NVTC's Northern Virginia Transit Funding Guide. It provides all of us and the public an interactive website. It explains how we fund WMATA, DRE, and local transit. And it's an impressive guide. It's almost like taking a microscope and looking into the very, very specific funding mechanisms that exist for transit in Northern Virginia. And it is a complicated, it's complex and sometimes complicated system and different revenue sources and funding streams. And I would recommend that you take a look at it. It is, I've certainly learned a good amount. I dove through it and worked through it as well. So I encourage everyone to look at that. And this is not the last part of this project and initiative. It is going to be expanded and there'll be pieces added. So if there are elements that you see that would be helpful to add to this guide, this interactive guide, let NVTC staff know. I know there are a couple of things I've let them know about and, you know, are looking in the way, but hopefully this will be a great resource for us and the public as we move to more discussion of funding options in the near future. So, and by the way, if you don't do QR codes, go to novatransit.org/funding, I guess. Programs/funding, and you can get to the guide. So that's my report, Mr. Chair.
Thanks a lot, Walter. Does anyone have any questions for Walter's committee? Okay, not seeing any, Chair Aguirre, now it's your turn.
Thank you, Chair Snyder. So I'm pleased to give an update on MVTC's work this legislative session. Then I'll turn it over to MVTC's legislative liaisons, Amy and Carter, to provide General Assembly wrap up. So the 2025 General Assembly session wrapped up on Saturday, February 25th. MVTC session was a relatively quiet one, and if anybody that was around there would attest to that as well. Much of our work this session was to help lay the groundwork for next year. Kate mentioned later this year, two major regional efforts that NVTC is a part of, the SJ28 Joint Subcommittee and DMV Moves will wrap up their work and will be looking to the General Assembly in 2026. Pass legislation advancing these recommendations for funding public transit in Northern Virginia and throughout the region and the Commonwealth. This session, we worked with our partners at WMATA to help introduce a budget amendment to restore $3.3 million in general funds for WMATA operating support that was the subject of a technical adjustment from the governor's office and reduced funding for WMATA from the 2-year state budget. That budget amendment was included in the final General Assembly budget that is awaiting action from the governor. And throughout the 2025, NVTC will continue to engage with members of the Legislative and Policy Committee, prepare for what we expect to be a very busy 2026 General Assembly session. We'll also be keeping an eye on the 2025 Virginia state elections when voters will elect a new governor and lieutenant governor, attorney general, and of course, all 100 House of Delegate members will be up for re-election. I'd like now to turn to Amy and Carter here at the table, so throw it over to y'all.
Thank you so much, Chair. We appreciate it. Good evening, everybody. I'm Amy Perrin-Seibert. This is Carter Whitlow, with Cumberland Strategy Group down in Richmond. Happy to be here tonight. I won't talk too much more than what the chair already talked about. Obviously, thank you to Delegate Sickles for helping us with the WMATA amendment. We really appreciate kind of truing up exactly what that looked like. NVTC worked with WMATA really closely and made sure that number was right. And again, appreciate DRPT's help with that as well. I know that was quite a big team to get all that done. So appreciate that work. As we said, it was not a big year this year, thankfully, for transportation. And so we had a couple of bills that we followed, some that we just mostly monitored. One was a bill dealing with the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund. That was the Hampton Roads Transit was looking to kind of remove themselves from the light rail from the formula for transit. Unfortunately, the way they were proposing to do it was going to have an impact on other transit agencies. So that bill did not make it forward this year because that was going to have too much of an impact, I think, across the board. I'm assuming they're going to go back to the drawing board on that. We monitored it and we were obviously not supportive of that structure. We also worked closely with VRE on the bills dealing with surplus lines of insurance. Very, very interesting issue that we have worked on a lot, Joe, for the second year, but those passed this year. And that deals with taxes and ensuring that because VRE is a nonprofit owned by NVTC and PRTC, they don't get charged that extra tax for buying surplus lines of insurance through a broker. So those bills passed this year as well. And then Senator Evan had a bill dealing with agendas and FOIA. Unfortunately, that passed the Senate, did not make it out of the House, and that will be going to the FOIA Council to be looked at. And no other changes with electronic meetings or any other things that are directly impacting on NVTC. And Carter, I'll turn it over to you about the bills that dealt with toll relief.
Yeah, we had two bills, one there carried by Delegate King and another one by Senator Srinivasan, which would have capped tolls at $200 per month. One was for the entire Commonwealth. In the House version and the Senate version, it was planning districts 8 and 16. NVTC did oppose those bills due to its impact on toll revenue, especially commuter choice. And both of those did not pass their respective chambers.
That's sort of it for our summary this year, but obviously looking forward to a very busy year. As Kate already told us, we have quite a few SJ28 and DMV Moves meetings, and we'll be looking forward to 2026 when we're going back with a whole new funding structure. So yeah, we're excited about that. But happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Thank you. Would any of our members of the General Assembly have questions, comments, either looking back or looking to the future at all? Anything you want to share with us tonight?
That's okay.
Let me say again, great job. So critical. So thank you.
It's not over yet.
Yeah.
Take a second.
Yeah, it's never over.
Straighten that.
So Commissioner Washington, you have a question about this? No? Okay, great. Well, I'll turn it back then to Chair Gary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just last thing to compliment what Kate said, earlier, the written report on DMV news and the FJ 28 joint session news meeting, materials you should all have in your packets. And, we also have a federal update, which I was going to, Mr. Tice.
That is fine. Yay. I'm happy to do so. And again, we're continuing to monitor what is happening in the federal space. Obviously, there's a lot of things that are happening in real time. What we do know right now is that when it comes to public transit funding, things that exist in the formula funding space, and that would be WMATA, VRE, OmniRide, all that formula funding, those things keep going out, those payments are still happening. When it comes to the discretionary programs, those are competitive programs. For example, we may have seen some of our systems get funding for low and no emission buses and those sorts of things. Those they're paused, but I think there actually may have been something today saying that those might be released. And included in that, I will say, is we actually do have a project that was funded by Representatives Fire and Connolly for some planning work on Route 7. We're also hoping for that to be released. So that's what we know right now. There was an executive order. It's actually referenced in the meeting material that came from Secretary Duffy that does talk about all of the parts of USDOT going back and re-examining the way the money is given out and falling under a number of different criteria. And so FTA is one part of that. FTA has not come out with any new guidance or revisions associated to implementing that executive order, but we're going to watch that. I think there's a number of different things that can either be supportive or challenging to the things that I think this region would be looking to in terms of public transit funding. Finally, the infrastructure bill that folks refer to, whether it be the BIL or IIJA, that was a large infrastructure bill that gave multi-year funding, and that's where those formula funds and other things are. That is actually only having about 2 years left to it. And so there's already conversations about reauthorization. I'm very involved in the legislative subcommittee of the American Public Transportation Association. So those conversations are just starting. And obviously it's understanding the political dynamics that are at play and how that works within that. There's a lot more to come in that space, but I just wanted you to be aware that the formula funding, or those are things that are keeping going. And actually they don't go against the deficit. So those things should be able to continue through this reauthorization, or until there's a need to be a reauthorization for those. That is highway, by the way, as well as transit programs that are in there. So just to give some context, lots of things happening, but there's no immediate crisis at this moment in time, but we're going to be keeping watching. So.
No immediate crisis at this
At
point in time.
time.
Yeah, okay. Any questions or comments for Kate? Yes, please. Yes.
Hi. So according to the Trump's proposed reconciliation package, and he's modifying eligibility for certain IIJ programs, he actually talks about reduce or imposing restrictions or limitations on certain IIJ advance appropriations, specifically in the areas of bike paths, EV charging stations, rail, other transit programs. What are you guys doing in terms of tracking this reconciliation process that's going to take several months in time to take up most of the oxygen post the potential shutdown in less than a week?
So because we don't touch about a lot of federal funding here at NVTC, I definitely rely on others to provide that expertise. I do know in terms of the formula funding that our properties get, those are the things that we've been watching, but any insights that you can provide would be fantastic. I'm pretty sure that VRE and WMATA they have federal folks that are tracking that stuff very closely, so they can probably speak better stuff.
Well, we're going to be getting an update next week. But so far, everything's been fine, but we haven't really heard anything. Yeah.
I don't know if fine is the good word.
Well, yeah, it's not to say that things can change, just, for right now.
Yes.
Sure, let's establish a area.
It's got to be renewed.
The PREA funding is that is one of the parts of funding that is based upon annual appropriations. So that will be something that's a conversation about the annual appropriations for this year.
So if there's a year-long CR.
then they will get.
You'll get 150 million.
Yeah. And our federal delegation has been very, very supportive. Metro Randy and some other folks met with the group of senators somewhat recently and others, and that did come up, but, you know, they've always been extremely supportive.
For what it's worth, I was recently appointed to the Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee for NLC. They're having the congressional conference this coming week, so if there's anything that we want to say, I'll have a follow-up for that as well.
So I think what I'm taking away from the questions is that, we need to make sure we're monitoring, watching federal development even more so than we have in the past, perhaps or needed to in the past. So I hear that, and it's, working with others that we will need to be focused more on these developments maybe than we in the past. But that, I think that goes to the questions and comments. So thanks for raising it. So any other questions for Kate on this particular topic? So now we'll hear from Chair Daly Polchek on the program advisory.
Thank you so much, Chair Snyder. We had a very exciting meeting, and you'll be seeing a lot of that today. On February 20th, the Program Advisory Committee received presentations on NVTC's shared on-route charging feasibility study. Have you seen that? NVTC is integrating transit, cycling, and micromobility in Northern Virginia report, and the I-395-95 commuter choice FY 26-27 applications eligibility results. So mouthful, but we've got a great team that will break it down for you. Our two action items this evening are to accept the findings of the feasibility study and the micromobility report. We will also receive a brief commuter choice update. I'll now, bless you, turn it over to Anne McGrain, who I believe is NVTC's new Deputy Director of Programs and Policy. Congratulations to her. She'll be presenting the findings of the shared on-route charging feasibility study. Take it away, Anne.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about our shared on-route charging feasibility study. And just before I get started, just to remind people of some definitions that I might be throwing around. Battery electric buses, or BEVs, are one form of zero emission bus, or BEVZ, if you hear them called. And so battery electric buses and fuel cell electric buses, which are powered by hydrogen, together zero emission buses. But for our purposes, Northern Virginia is really focused right now on battery electric buses, and that's what this on-route charging feasibility entails. Next slide, please. So I think in the previous conversation, we discussed a bit about how there is some uncertainty in that federal discretionary funding space. And so there are still challenges in the battery electric bus transition that our region is undertaking, either from a funding perspective. There's also, I think every time I talk before the commission, I just discuss how the time frame for actually having a bus delivered is lengthy. And so these are things that we confront regularly. But I also like to point out the good news that we're having. And so the photos here on this slide, on the left is ART's operations and maintenance facility, which opened just at the end of last year. And it is being equipped to handle battery electric bus charging. And then on the right is one of Loudoun's 2 new battery electric buses that they just welcomed into their fleet. So we, in operation across the region, have battery electric buses in Alexandria, Fairfax County, and Loudoun. And Arlington's first 4 are coming very soon. And so we're really making progress across the region, which I think is a great thing. Next slide, please. So last year in January, NVTC released its Northern Virginia Zero Emission Bus Strategic Plan, and that plan outlines 6 strategies to advance our zero emission bus transition. And for today's conversation, what I'll really be focusing on is the 4th strategy, which is to support the development of shared charging infrastructure, with the idea being that by sharing infrastructure, there can be cost savings around that and just also efficiency. Next slide. So I think it's important first to just say, what is it? What am I talking about when I'm discussing shared on-route charging? So this photo on the screen is an example of on-route charging in New York City. In maybe a year or two, I would hope to be able to show an example that's local. Alexandria is in the process of building an on-route charger in the next couple of years. But so this charger is in Manhattan, and essentially what it does is as a bus travels along its route, it's able during its layover to get a charge, and that allows it to travel farther than it would if it were just relying on the depot charge. So essentially by having on-route charging, you're extending the mileage that an electric bus can achieve during the day. So on-route, or it's also known as opportunity charging. And with us, what we were looking at was this idea of then sharing on-route charging. The concept being that you could have multiple agencies share the same charger, or at least the electric pole to feed the different charger plugs. This, through the study that I'm going to discuss a bit more, we learned is a really relatively unusual thing. And part of the reason for that is just that there aren't that many areas in the country where you have so many transit agencies with overlapping service areas, such that it would make sense to kind of try to accomplish some of the operational challenges that you'd be confronted with. But in Northern Virginia, it's very relevant. Next slide, please. So last year, NVTC requested, and we've received free technical assistance from the federal government through the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and also the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. This request led to a year-long study in which NREL's consultants evaluated the feasibility of WMATA, ART, DASH, and Fairfax connector sharing on-route charging infrastructure. We initially picked the 4 agencies just for one thing, so the universe of what we were studying was a bit smaller, but also because at the time they were furthest along in planning for their battery electric buses. And then my final definition of the night will just be that this image on the right depicts what a block is. And I think the important thing to just understand is that it's essentially a bus scheduling term, and a block refers to the time when a bus leaves the depot, however many routes it does, what layover it might do, and comes back into the depot. And so as we were evaluating potential locations for shared on-route charging, the block was essentially the level of measurement we used. So I just need to kind of tell you this story so that as I discuss blocks more in the future, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Next slide, please. So the first step in our evaluation process was we wanted to identify the potential sites where shared charging could occur. And so this map is the result of that first step. It identified 18 potential locations where 2 or more of the 4 agencies had a block, but then had a layover at that location. And so the larger the circle, the more blocks with layovers at that location. So, a quick view of map, you can see the Pentagon is a very large circle, which I think makes sense to all of us in this room. It has a lot of buses that all are converging on that point. But then from here, what we did was the team developed criteria that then helped us evaluate the potential feasibility of each site. Next slide, please. So in August, we held a workshop with stakeholders from each agency to both discuss their potential concerns about shared on-route charging and how it would work, what they would see as a hurdle. But we also asked them to prioritize a list of criteria so that then the consultant team could apply weights to it to try to identify a way to kind of weight the sites by feasibility and preference. And so the results of that prioritization ranking are what's on the right. And we ended up with 4 key criteria after having further conversation about things. And those were what we used to develop the weighted list of 18 sites. Next slide, please. So this table shows the 18 sites ordered based on their weighted score.
One thing I do want to stress about this is just that some of these criteria, namely the space availability and utility capacity criteria, they're really based on qualitative desktop analysis that needs further study if you're really going to go ahead and advance one site or the other. So the way I look at this list of sites is more almost as buckets of feasibility, like sites 1 through 5 or even 1 through 8. Might be kind of equally promising as a site for on-route charging that's shared. But it really kind of depends on what agencies may be making the most progress with their battery electric bus transition, need on-route charging, because a lot of people, when they first implement battery electric buses, focus on shorter routes that can do it without any on-route help, and then are interested in building out that site. So this is a nice kind of list to then generate further discussion. Next slide, please. So as we think about what's next, one conclusion that I took from the analysis is just that shared on-route charging is certainly feasible. There are still many questions that should be resolved around whether the cost savings are worth the potential operational hassles. You think about multiple buses converging on a layover site. You know, it's adjusted in certain ways. You might have kind of one bus not able to access a charger. There are just conversations that would need to be much more further developed before you really work out the solution there. So moving forward with any of these sites that we've evaluated would require both a project champion and also a more in-depth analysis of the site. But I do think it's also important to remember that this was a nice kind of early look at what do we need to be considering. Our agencies are still very much at kind of an initial or maybe moving into a medium phase of battery electric buses. So the fleets are still pretty small. There aren't that many locations even now where there would be multiple agencies overlapping with battery electric buses. But by thinking about it in advance, we're setting ourselves up to be better coordinated in the future when that comes to play. Next slide, please. And so tonight, what we're asking is for you to accept the findings of this feasibility study. And as a next step, what's happening is we have we have a technical assistance grant from DRPT. And this is something that we can use to further analyze some of these almost building block or foundational charging kind of needs that we saw through this project. So we're slightly adjusting the scope of what that work will look like, mostly because we don't want to jump ahead of ourselves from where we are and want to focus on what technical assistance would be most useful for the jurisdictions. So I'm currently talking with jurisdictional staff to just tighten up that scope a little bit. But we will be back later in the spring for approval to release an RFP for work. So we're continuing to push forward this work. And we also will continue to do some of the things that we've been doing for the past few years now, which is we host a quarterly zero emission bus working group and generally try to provide information and education and just connect people around maybe challenges they might be having or lessons learned from other agencies. So with that, I say thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Swati and the commissioners have any questions for you?
Quick comment, looks like a very good top 5.
All right, yes.
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer, maybe, but what is kind of the range of costs for one of these charging stations? Is it like?
Yeah, so there are some in the full report, a specific layout, of kind of broad costs for it. I, off the top of my head, can't remember the specifics. What I will say is that the consultant team looked at, there was a decision made by the staff that for operational purposes, they thought the best way for shared on-route charging to work would be if agencies kind of pulled together to make sure the utility capacity was appropriate for the site, but then you'd kind of maintain your individual bays. That would, so like a Fairfax connector might have a location and a Metro would have another and ART might have another. And in that scenario, the kind of cost per bay of savings, if you did shared charging, was about $75,000. So it's, and this is all with like a big asterisk of, you need to do a much more detailed site analysis. There are infrastructure costs that you might not be aware of until that happens.
There, roughly that.
Yeah,
75.
because you're just kind of paying for the extra charging plugs and additional infrastructure. So that's like where the savings come in. That's not the total.
It would seem one of the planning challenges would be kind of improvement curve for the bus technology, right? We decided today we were going to install a bank of these chargers at the Pentagon Metro. Maybe that'd be a tough location.
Absolutely.
But you know, it'd be 3 to 5 years until it was up and running, and in 3 to 5 years, whatever the range of the buses that we perhaps predicated that location on is going to be different for the buses that jurisdictions are pursuing at that time.
Yes, and I think that's the benefit in some ways of taking this transition in a kind of methodical process, in that you're not committing at one time to kind of that year's technology. What I'll say, I guess, to answer your question is that I think there would still be potential benefits to on-route charging from the perspective of, as all the technology is improving, what we see improving a lot is kind of what you're able to get out of a token size battery. And if you're able to kind of downsize your battery size because you have this network of chargers, you'd save money on the bus as that battery technology improves. But yes, you definitely want to make sure, there are standards that are being developed, and for things like pantographs, which are the rooftop chargers for the buses that are most often used for on-route charging. Those have established standards, and I think we have agencies in the area that are really committed to, as they build out new infrastructure, allowing partner agencies to come and test them just to ensure we have good interoperability and redundancy. So I think if you were to commit to a site, you'd have the shared charging infrastructure aspect. You'd be able to, use it for multiple agencies and things like that. But yeah, it's definitely a moving target.
Thanks. Any other questions? Yes.
So thank you for that. Very, very interesting. So every time I see that, I actually think about the cost of batteries, and I'm way more prone to pay for this infrastructure that may serve also others than to supercharged batteries, because they make really the bulk of the price of the cost of a ZEV. Right? My question is the following: the way I read the scoring on the map, I see it follows completely the metro system, right? Because of course it's where the electric infrastructure is. The problem is that we still replicate here the lack of service to the places that are not served. Take, for example, Route 7 or Tobia Pike, all the way to Annandale, etc. So, and these are premium and bus routes that are very, very efficient today, good bus routes. And these are also the ones that we want to develop into bus rapid transit routes. So how does this match?
That's a great question. I think part of what you're seeing in the results of the feasibility study are simply the kind of metrics we put around it of there's more than two agencies kind of connecting at this point and laying over. What happened, there's the space often at a metro station to do that layover. And if you're kind of in other parts that are further away from a metro station, chances are that it might be like one agency that's laying over in a certain spot or another. So I certainly think there's a future for other locations that are beyond the metro stations for on-route charging. It might be more
like jurisdictional led, it would like benefiting one agency more than maybe the whole, but, yeah, it's an excellent point, and I think it's one to explore further.
Bus riders there are waiting for us to deliver. The others have metro already.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you. We'll circle back on that.
So just to add on to Supervisor Waukesha's question about technology and it advancing, either in this study or in future studies, are you going to be looking at inductive and road charging?
So inductive charging is definitely something that we track. I would say right now with buses, the scenario is that there are two different kind of main manufacturers and they have different standards. And so, a plug-in charger and a pantograph charger are both currently have active standards through SAE, which decides these things, and inductive isn't yet a finalized standard. And so until that's a finalized standard, I think you'll see agencies reticent to take that on and commit to that, kind of from very similar technology, just waiting to make sure that the technology is mature enough. But it's certainly an interesting technology and something that everyone, I think, is looking at. And I'll add that what we do at NVTC, we also participate in, ACTA holds a monthly or bi-monthly zero emission bus focus working group. So you hear from agencies across the country who are implementing different types of infrastructure. And so there are some agencies that have the inductive chargers. And so learning from their experiences and kind of figuring that out is kind of the stage that we're at now.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think going back to Mr. Karantonis' point, and it's a well taken one. When we're looking at some of the bus rapid transit opportunities, is that not a place, given where there's going to be dedicated lanes that we can try and sort at them?
Shared chart, yes, definitely, absolutely.
And I think that would go towards, we said for Route 7, for the Duke corridor, but that is technically maybe not Columbia Pike, but potentially Van Dorn, potentially, the rest of 236, and I think there's one other place that I'm missing, but I think it's definitely something that we need to explore. If we're gonna put dedicated lanes in, we should explore putting in a charging along those sectors as well.
Yeah, it's great comments. And yes.
There may be an advantage of our best performing bus routes right now, that they have spaces and places where it's not very difficult to get the right of way for the centered spaces where you can either minutes, etc. The problem is the availability of power.
Yeah.
That's the only problem. However, with distributed charging, and then John mentioned, we don't have to deliver gigawatts there. We have to deliver only a fraction of what normally a full-fledged charging location would have to have. So it's actually, we are more capable, I assume that we're more capable of delivering a distributed system rather than the huge transformers and electric switch around. We had this problem with other, metro mobility has always this discussion, right? With a problem of terminus supercharging, or is it a distributed system? And I think that this is very good work towards the understanding of how distributed, the advantages of a distributed system, which makes it easier for us to adapt, invest gradually, incrementally, realize, advantages earlier, like the batteries. Looks like
it's being planned into the one is on European line, so it's part of the build out that's already being planned. And I think it's Huntington is the station location, and it in some ways tests these assumptions very well, because Route 1 in this area is 7 or 8 miles long, depending on the driving. So So it will addresses some of the biggest challenges about. So, but it is being built into the system.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the goal here is that we kind of expect different agencies are probably moving, if needed, if they need it for their service profile, are looking towards what that on-ramp charging might look like. And so again, NVTC as a regional body, we're thinking, okay, well, if you're gonna build something here and this agency is gonna build something here, let's make sure you're talking. And can you share these resources? By sharing these resources, maybe you don't need to build something over here. So it's just, it's more, I think we see our places making sure those lines of communication are open. And then as agencies are building out this infrastructure, also making sure that we are ensuring full interoperability of it. Because it's one thing to make sure that you're following the same SAE standards, but it's another thing to then actually truly test it in practice and get it right. And so, yes, I think it's like a yes and kind of approach to how we're gonna power these buses.
Yeah, and I think this is where we had that opportunity. This effort was specifically focused on where there's shared. So all of this other stuff is absolutely fantastic, and I think that's where the information sharing is going between whether it be Fairfax County, or Dash or what have you. So this study that we had NREL do was very focused on where there might be more than one bus coming together. The nice thing is, and I think Dan's just doing a fantastic job, is actually getting everybody together to talk, whether it is the lessons learned, or the challenges and all that sort of thing, but also then that people can be strategic in the way they're approaching these things. But I just want to make sure folks understand the focus of this study was specifically on where more than one bus. So Route 7 is going to be, could be an important route to do, but that's currently the Metro bus route. As compared to some of these locations where you may have a Metro bus coming with a Dash, coming with something else. So, a lot more work to do in this space.
Really quickly, I mean, one thing that just comes to mind is, and kind of following up, is that you don't have the noise, you don't have the exhaust, so you'll probably have easier sell to the community around, where you have to lay over the right of way. So that's kind of another benefit.
Just a quick comment, I wonder if there's also possibility to investigate like a lease back model for systems that are further along on their battery electric journey. If they want to go ahead and install in maybe one of our primary locations, whether there's opportunity in the future, other groups follow along to have them kind of, instead of paying up front, to enter like an MOU with the locality and say, you installed this up front, you paid for all the costs, but now we're here, we would like to partner and use it. So that, it's not holding people back from installing the infrastructure if you don't have everyone at the same place.
Yeah, I think that, again, these agencies coordinate on a lot of different things, and so I think that's definitely possible, and kind of coming back to the comment I made earlier in the presentation, the city of Alexandria with Dash is kind of actively planning for an opportunity charger, and so once that's in place, we'll have a local example of what that looks like, and I think there's possibilities to just even learn from that experience.
Thank you. Great conversation. Any other questions? Comments? I have a motion to accept the findings of the shared on-route charging feasibility study.
Second.
And secondly, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? And so the votes in the board. So, yeah, there's a lot. So there's a lot of interest.
Yeah, so the next one, another very exciting update, and I think one that you'll see a familiar face who's on the screen now. You'll see later in the presentation, and this is about micromobility. I actually love seeing these routes. I was out in DC today, used a Lyft bike for the first time, and I haven't lived in DC in a while, so learning a very different system from the Cabby bikes. Our senior program manager, Dr. Xavier Harmony, is going to give us a presentation. And really looking at a lot of the intersection of bicycling and micro mobility, which I think a lot of us in our jurisdictions are looking at. How do we increase ridership, look at that last mile, and look at the data for how to make improvements. And how bicycling can improve our use of transit. So, and vice versa, how micro trail increases the use of capital bike share. So a lot of transportation modes, looking at the whole network, bless you. And to that, I will turn it over to Xavier. There he is, with the plus. Hi.
Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to start with just one definition, so we're all on the same page. What is micromobility? It's a term some might have heard. Some might have heard of microtrans, which is a little bit different. Bicycling is a type of micromobility, but micromobility is a broader category that's besides smaller, lower speed vehicles that can be electric or human powered, like typical bicycle, shared or privately owned. Examples include bicycles, bike share, and scooters. I'm starting with this definition because I mentioned bicycles and micromobility throughout this presentation and the report. Just want to be clear that bicycles are a type of micromobility, but you just might be more familiar with bicycles, so I use both terms. But this is what they are. You'll see a lot of these around Northern Virginia, DC, but they can be capital bike shares, an example, Douglas scooters or bikes, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide, please. So we did this study that looks at how these two different modes are integrated. There's a few different reasons why we did this. First of all, we did this study first, a similar study back in 2010, but a lot has changed since then. 2010, and when the study was completed in 2010, I'll be very specific, was before Capital Bike Share came to Washington, DC. This study preceded Capital Bike Share by a few months, as we discussed at the TAC meeting. It was also preceded Dockless Bike Share and Scooter Share. Those weren't in existence when the study was done. And the regions have invested very heavily in bicycle infrastructure, especially since this time. Washington, DC has featured in some existing research on this topic, but Northern Virginia has been less of a focus, and arguably Northern Virginia is a much more complicated sort of focus, and I think is worthy of more attention here. Then finally, the region has invested a lot in projects that combine both transit and cycling over the last several years. In fact, there's $750 million programs right now in about to open or opening projects that cover both these modes. Next slide, please. There are also a lot of benefits to both transit and micromobility for combining these two modes together. I'm not going to go through this list. You have it in front of you. It's in the report. The highlighted ones are some of the ones that get featured in this report. There are just so many benefits of both modes of transportation that again warrant why we study this and why these we should continue investing in improving the connection between bicycling and micromobility and transit. Next slide, please. So in order to do this, we created a study approach that is based on what kind of others have done before us, no point reinventing the wheel. And we looked at 5 different dimensions, you could say, of connections, ways to evaluate these connections. We looked at bicycle parking at transit stops and stations, park rental, so you can think of like shared micromobility there, for example, bikes on transit vehicles, safe routes to transit, and customer communication and education. We did this through existing data, existing plans and policies, case studies across the US, and some spatial and statistical analysis that I definitely won't go through tonight. Next slide, please. So before I begin talking about some of these results, I want to highlight that these results are very much dependent on the information that was available. Just because something isn't shown doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just may mean the data isn't there. And this is a really great example of bicycle parking micromobility storage. This map you see on the right is an example of where we have micromobility storage around transit locations and around jurisdictions in general. It looks like there's not a lot there. This is because we don't always know where there is like a bike rack at a bus stop, for example. Those data aren't really gathered in a systematic kind of way, so they're not really shown here. But some of the things we could determine was that in Virginia, 63% of metro rail stations have bike parking, which is slightly below the system-wide average. And unsurprisingly, stations that have bike parking are more likely to be in the urban areas, Alexandria, Arlington kind of areas. Not all local transit agencies or jurisdictions track bike parking, as I mentioned. But some transit agencies do include these kinds of infrastructure, bike infrastructure, or at bus stops in their bus amenity policy. So examples are RQ, Loudoun County Transit. They all mention different ways where you need to include bike racks or consideration for these things at transit stops. Next slide, please. So shared micromobility near transit stops. Capital Bike Share is very transit accessible, which is great to see. Almost all Capital Bike Share is within half a mile of a bus stop. 40% of Capital Bike Share is within half a mile of the metro rail station. And then both Capital Bike Share and Dockworth scooters and bikes are used more near metro rail. So we did a little bit of statistical analysis there and just had a look to see, is it used more if it's near metro rail versus away from metro rail? And it was used more near metro rail. We tested that against other things like, is it just because there's more density there or because there are more jobs there or other things? We found that this was a pretty valid conclusion that Capital Bike Share and scooters benefit from being near transit. Next slide, please. Also, great to see that all Northern Virginia transit agencies allow for bikes on transit. Some of the policies differ between agencies, and commuter bus services are also have slightly different policies. Bikes are also allowed on rail vehicles, including both VRE and Metro Rail. However, while bikes are allowed in these vehicles, only VRE regularly tracks bikes on transit. VRE began allowing bikes on transit back in 2022, and they have seen over 100% increase in the number of people using bikes on trains since then. Next slide, please. Safe routes to transit was a pretty important part of this report. It's something that's an important focus of both the transit community and the bicycling community. We looked at it from a policy perspective and a data perspective. So this is looking at some of the policy stuff. We looked at are bikes allowed in bus lanes? What kind of policies exist? And right now, it's really just Arlington and Alexandria that have explicit policies about this. And then we also looked at bikes and bus stops. How do they interact? What kind of things are considering these interactions? What you see on the right here is an image of something called a floating bus stop, where a bus line intersects the sidewalk and a bus stop. This allows bicycles to travel through continuously and allows people to cross over so they're not impeding the bike lane and the bike lane's not blocking where buses need to stop to pick up people. This is an example of a solution that accounts for bikes and bus stops together. And this has been studied pretty extensively in this area, and there's a few good examples of this kind of intersection treatment, literally just down the street from here. Arlington's been building a few of these, literally just down the street. You can walk out here for 5 minutes and see 3 examples. I can show you if you want. Next slide, please. So also looking at safe routes of transit, we looked at how people use micromobility to access Metro Rail, and this is some really great data survey data we got from Metro, where they show both how many people or what proportion of people are using micromobility to access Metro Rail, but also what types of micromobility you use, whether it's your own scooter or a shared scooter, your own bicycle, shared bicycle, that kind of stuff. And what's really interesting is that it's not just the really urban core like Arlington, Alexandria that is seeing a lot of use here. You're still seeing some fairly suburban places that are getting a lot of use here. So Herndon, for example, about 60% of people access the Herndon Metro Rail station using their own bicycle, which I thought was a great thing to find, a great thing to see. Not quite what I was expecting, but it's great to see that it's not just, again, the dense areas that are using bicycles and scooters to access these things. So there are a few great finds. This is one of my favorite graphs from this report. There's just so much information in here, and it's a little bit small on the slide, but if you really want to dig into this in this report, you can see this one. If you really want to get into this, you can ask me. I can share some of the data with you directly. But this is one of my favorites of this. I also want to say thanks Sophie Spiel, top of this, who's not here right now. She created this graph and a lot of the graphics, and she did a great job here. Hope you're listening, Sophie. All right, next slide, please. And then finally, communication education. This might be a familiar face, or hopefully is a familiar face for people here. But there are multiple ways jurisdictions and transit agencies communicate and educate people on transit and micromobility connections. I got a list of a variety of them there. educating on alternatives, demonstrating on how to put bikes and buses, like this screenshot of a video from Alexandria shows, incorporating bicycle wayfinding, etc. All these examples are found in existing jurisdiction plans, policies, and websites. That's where I found it, and I linked to it all in the report if you want to read more about it. Next slide, please. And finally, we have some second last, we have some broad conclusions that we got from this report. So transit and bicycling integration is an important regional goal. The investment is really speaks loudly to this. $750 million, again, currently programmed in projects to connect these two modes of transportation. Bicycle infrastructure results in large increases in transit access. I didn't show this on my previous slides because there's so much to show in this report. It's like a 40-page report. But just having bicycle facilities near transit really increases the reach of transit. So it means that more people can access transit. Transit doesn't have to spend as much money to go to more places because there's more connections you can get there by using bicycles or scooters or paddle bikes or some of that stuff. Metro rail is associated with increasing the both bike and scooter use. And then while Northern Virginia does a good job, there are still opportunities to learn from others. And I think that's one of the important things all who work in this space can really learn from is that there's always opportunities to learn from each other. Kate was just mentioning that earlier about how she learned from other agencies, what happened in legislative space. This is something that we all think about all the time in Northern Virginia at NVTC, for what others doing and how we can learn that to improve transit in our own space here. Next slide. And this is the final slide. These are recommendations based on our report, our work. So first of all, continued coordination is really important. I'll talk about a few examples there. Both the examples that we see going on and some that have been talked about. A really great example of this is actually between Kew and George Mason University. They have done some really great work demonstrating that focus of that metro rail and bicycle connection. They have a really great study, for example, they've done on that. Second, increased transit bicycling integration in suburban areas. There's a variety of ways to do this. Expanding micromobility, for example, easy access to bicycles on commuter buses, more bicycle and other micromobility parking and transit stops, and then just more bicycle infrastructure near transit stops as well. Number three, package more transit bicycle improvements together into larger funding projects. Number four, increase clarity in infrastructure policies with transit bicycling intersect. Then finally, increasing the collection and sharing of data focusing on transit bicycle integration. Like I said earlier, we did a lot of work here, but these results are somewhat limited based on what data is available. More data means we have a better sense of what we're doing well and where there's room for improvement. That's it from me. I ran this out fairly fast, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much. Any questions, comments? Yes, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a couple questions, and the first one though is surrounding the $750 million that you said has already been programmed. How much of that is for bike and mobility hardware versus actual infrastructure improvements? And the reason why I ask is that I can remember a couple of years ago, because we had new metro stations come online in Loudoun County, but yet the planning had not addressed the fact that it's like people can't easily and safely get to those things without the spending of, say, another $35 million. And so how much of that $750 million is programmed to actually make bike and pedestrian paths safe for people to be able to get to those transit vehicles?
It's almost like I planted this question because a large majority of that funding is literally about increasing that access through that type of infrastructure that you're talking about there. Literally building bike paths that go directly to metro rail stations or other transit stops is a lion's share. Like, I think it's like 90-something%. It's a large portion of it. A lot of it is packaged together in existing things, like you might have a road with a bike path next to it, but it's explicitly designed to be connecting to transit. That's why some of these dollars are so big, but it's also designed to increase that access.
Okay, good. That's good to know. And then the other question I have is on the floating bus stops, the example that you have on this particular one. Are localities and VDOT, as we are building or renovating existing road infrastructure, looking at doing things like this in improvements, or are we just like creating the same problem again by just creating more standard roads without bike paths?
I will say that this particular type of interaction has been studied a lot in this region. I don't know if VDOT has, but I know WMATA has been studying it. I know the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments have been studying it. I know that Arlington has guidance on this explicitly. I know Fairfax County has guidance on this explicitly. Even across the water in Montgomery County, they have guidance on this and done a lot of work on this. This has been a very heavy focus in this region, especially, but also in other places. The really important thing is to make sure that you're doing this right and that you're doing this in a way that it works for all users of the transportation system. And so there's a lot of people working really hard to try and make sure they don't repeat mistakes of the past, is kind of suggesting that, and they do things better in the future. So I am personally cautiously optimistic that this is going to get better over time, and there's a lot of really great people working to study this.
And I guess the third question I have related to that, is there a role for NVTC to be able to do something to actually advocate on behalf of using this type of design work for localities that fall within our purview here?
I think that is a more difficult question for us to answer, because I think that it's really up to the agencies who own the stops about how they want their stops to interact with their roads. So I think it's hard for us to have a specific position on that. But I think what we can do is, as Mr. Gray talked about earlier, is act as that coordinating communication kind of role and help make sure that people are coming to the table and talking to each other, sharing experiences. And it was just an example, I think it may have been last year, where we were actually at a Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments meeting. There was at least 3 of us that were there, where we sat in a good 2-hour meeting, I think it was, talking about this very topic, just to make sure that, and this was a lot of people in the room from around the region, sharing experiences, sharing their perspectives, to make sure that we're learning from each other, and that while we're not taking position on it, we're helping facilitate that conversation.
Okay, all right, thank you.
If I may add to that, I love hearing what you're saying. As some of us, unlike Arlington, who do not own our own roads and do work with VDOT to get approvals. We always love support for and advocacy at the state level for having more ability to do more of this. We do have some urban road standards in places like Tyson, but it continues to be a conversation and work. We do have a couple in Fairfax that we have piloted or are piloting. Happy to bring you out there, but I think as our region and our regional bodies moving more toward this, that continued conversation with the state and with VDOT is always
I think that would be good, because there may be a role for us to be able to encourage, persuade, direct that there should be in certain areas, maybe planning district 8 or maybe planning districts in Richmond or down in roads. But this becomes a standard when we are doing either new road construction or we're doing major renovations.
That would be fabulous. Thank you. Yeah, I know many of us have had conversations with Bill Cutler and the district up here, and your support very much. Would love that.
Great comments. Anyone have anything else you want to add? Respond.
So the question, we have to change the law for everybody to get together and work together. We need a law for that?
Not to the legislature, but to the local government.
Yeah, we do it here regionally, but I think we need help.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just hearing that VDOT's got the back on some of this crap backs, and I've seen them shaking their head over there.
I have to say, Tyson's Community Alliance recently hosted a meeting that was very helpful. We had VDOT there, we had our agencies there, we were there, and I agree that just that conversation was very helpful, but I think having electeds in the room helps move that along.
I'm going anywhere you want me to.
No, that's never.
District Sheriff of Bagley does have.
Yes, our very own Sarah Bagley has already appeared on this slide, so yes, please. What do you have to add?
Well, I just wanted to acknowledge Xavier's excellent choice for screenshots for his presentation.
See it.
But I appreciate this conversation, and when it was presented at the PAC committee, you know, we all discussed how valuable this sort of last mile, or you know, is to the system, and so I just wanted to reiterate that in the full body here and indicate how much like my own access to Metro. I'm one of those people who lives like a little over a mile from 2 Metro stops, and it's my bike that sort of facilitates my entry into those systems. And like at the Potomac Yard Station, we have secured bike storage, and how much that's facilitated, I think, usage there. So just wanted to reiterate, I think it's not even about bike riders or scooters, it's about people who want to use Metro and how this opens up the possibilities for them. When it feels too long, too cold to walk that mile, I can do that ride in 6 minutes. So thank you very much to Xavier and his staff for the details and the excellent research on how to put your bike on a dash bus. Thank you all.
You, Maureen, did you have a question?
No, I was just pointing out that Sarah had her.
I'll ask for all the grand copies. So the only other comment that I'd make is I'm really interested to follow on micro transit, because as much as we're supporting micro mobility, it's there's probably demographics that could be that are not likely to use either of those. Transit, micro transit might be something we need to serve other elements of the population. So I hope that we can continue and look at micro transit, see what other areas are doing. Any other questions or comments on this? Yes.
Yeah. Dr. Carmody, I love the slide 21. A couple of notes on that. Number one, it is very clear that the number of users, we're going to have micromobility increases as we go out. Correct? So that's number one. Number two, there should be an indication here that certain services, like for example, CABI, are geo restricted, so they are not available. You cannot go everywhere. So at some point, this is an additional layer, kind of a color that needs to come on that. What I wanted to ask you is to see, if we can, there are also bus corridors that move a lot of people, and that are really efficient bus corridors who, where the last mile has an additional benefit. Why? Because we are bending backwards today to build this micro routes, micro bus routes that cost a ton of money. Are not moving too many people, but they serve a purpose there. So if we could substitute some of the service with efficient micromobilities in the sense of mobility hubs at major bus station, that would be really a great improvement. Because Bagley has showed us, we can take even your bike on but it's even better if you arrive with your bus and the bike is just waiting for you right there. And I think that we have these. I live in such a corridor where we have 2 additional bus routes apart just to make this last mile feasible. And they cost really a lot of money. The other day we were discussing whether we can afford them. But it would be great if we could have actually a couple of habitat hubs. Now that we have electromobility of CABI, which is an important thing, we see a record high adoption. That was not the case before.
I'm one of them.
Yeah. No.
Absolutely, appreciate the feedback.
Great. Thank you very much. So entertain a motion to accept the findings from integrated transit cycle and micromobility.
So moved.
Second, any further discussion? Moving to the city policy.
Aye.
There's opposed, any abstentions, and I'm accessing the administrator. So the next, Kelly, I'll turn it over to you, but I think we're, if we can sort of move this item.
Yeah, I'll be quick. First of all, I hope that within our last presentation before Xavier goes back to Bowie land, from Bowie's town. But I would like to now turn it over to our commuter choice program manager, Daniel Nickelbein, for a brief update on commuter choice.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Palchik, and I will be quick as well. So included in your agenda packet is a list of the 15 commuter choice applications received and the funding requests. In January, NVTC and DRPT staff conducted an eligibility review to ensure that project applications meet the requirements of the I-395 corridor MOA and commuter choice program policy. To be eligible, a proposed project must demonstrate a benefit to toll payers of the express lanes, improve person throughput, and have a logical nexus to the I-395 corridor, among other requirements. As part of that review, NVTC and DRPT determined that one application, the Arlington Cross Potomac Trail Northern Virginia Approach Project, was ineligible for commuter choice funding. After removing that application from consideration, the funding requested from the remaining 14 commuter choice applications is within the $25 to $30 million of funding available for new projects. That total does not include a second $10 million award to Fairfax County Richmond Highway BRT project that was approved by the commissions 2 years ago as part of a $20 million award to be split across 2 funding cycles that will be made off the top in this year's program. So staff are now finalizing the scoring of the 14 eligible applications. After application scores are finalized, the public comment period will open in mid-March and close in mid-April. Application scores, public comments received, and a draft program of projects will be brought to the Joint Commission Working Group for consideration at their April 24th meeting. In May, staff will then present that draft program of projects to both the NVTC and the PRTC commissions with approval of the final program by both commissions set for June and transmittal of the final program to DRPT for CTP approval and inclusion in the 6-year improvement program. With that, I am happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dan. Any questions for Daniel? I'm not seeing any. Next item on the agenda. Thank you, James, by the way. Maybe next time you can be earlier and we'll give you. Anyway, so the next item on the agenda is the Virginia Railroad Express, the CEO is here tonight to give a CEO report. And then take any questions on the report, and then we'll turn it over to VRE Operations Board Chair Sarah Maggie, the ever famous Sarah Maggie, who is will take us through an action item, and I want to underscore that is a very important action item. So first, Rich, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, commission members. I'll be concise here. You do have the CEO report in your packet. Let me just give you a couple of updated data points. In February, our system performance still not up to target of 90%, but we did land slightly under 85% from the on-time performance standpoint. Still heavy congestion out there, and of course we had some weather-related days. Ridership. February, albeit having one less service day for us compared to January, was up 36% or about 2,500 average daily riders. I'll note that has constantly been going up on a daily basis, even more so, even though we've only had 3 days of service in March. That's that those ridership numbers continue to pick up. So that's my report, Mr. Chair.
Thanks very much, and I'm sure you're studying any impacts from the new administration. Modeling that, thinking about that. Thanks. Do any commissioners have any questions for Rich? Yeah.
Very quickly, thank you, Rich. That's great news about the February numbers. I noticed that over the last year, the numbers, ridership numbers have not been great. So it looks like maybe there's a corner that's being turned. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Any other questions? Okay, Sarah, turn it over to you for the proposed action.
All right, thank you all. The first action item to be considered tonight is to approve resolution number 2557. The VRE Operation Board recommends the commission approval of resolution number 2557, which will authorize the VRE CEO to execute the Manassas Line funding agreement with the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. The agreement sets out the responsibilities, timelines, and processes by which VRE has committed to provide $155 million in funding over a 5-year period to acquire 4 property interests from VPRA, which are critical to VRE's current and future commuter rail operations. I'm going to turn it over to VRE CEO Rich Dalton and VRE CFO Mark Schofield to give their presentation on this item.
Thank you. Just go ahead and go to the next slide. We'll use this slide just kind of as a backdrop, just as a reminder. We have been working in collaboration with the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority since about January 2023, or excuse me, 2024, on a transaction whereby the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority did purchase what we refer to as the Manassas Line, which is the blue line up there. We'll show you another slide here in just a second. Give you another version of that. Of course, the purpose of that was to essentially, or let me just say, what VRE gets out of that deal is right-of-way access in a more of a perpetual mode. Some of you know our access agreements previously with Norfolk Southern always were in these 5-year timeframes. Seems like we're constantly renegotiating agreements one after the other. So more an access in somewhat perpetuity, control over stations. It also gives us, which is really key for us right now. I talked earlier just a moment ago about, a segment of our market, which is federal government workers, which is about 65%, but there's this 35% out there that are not federal government workers. And because we previously did not have the nimbleness or the flexibility to place our service where the demand is at, this transaction will overcome that in the near term for us. So that's a big benefit for us. And then the other thing that is very beneficial for us is that now this segment of the railroad gets managed more locally, and that's important as well. Locally meaning in collaboration with VRE and the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority versus having the control even down to the maintenance and dispatching coming from currently Atlanta, if you will. So a lot of benefits for us there. Again, wanted to show you this overview slide. Mark Schofield, our Chief Financial Officer, he'll go through some of the finer points of the transaction. You've seen this, you've seen the draft agreement several times, if you will. So again, Mark will just remind us what the salient points of the agreement are.
Great, Mark. Thank you, Rich. Good evening, commission members. If you take your mind back a couple of years ago, when VPRA was acquiring railroad property on the CSX corridor as a part of the TRV program, VRE agreed to make a major contribution to that transaction through bond proceeds and also through ongoing cash contributions. The agreement that we're talking about here tonight is conceptually kind of similar. We have VPRA purchasing right away from the host railroad. VRE is a major beneficiary of this, and so we are agreeing to participate in the transaction. I think this transaction is even a little better for VRE long term because in this case we will be getting specific property interests. So next slide, please. So through this agreement, not only are we going to be making a major commitment to advance commuter rail, but we are going to reduce the uncertainty over key properties that we need in order to have capacity, reliability, flexibility in the future. The agreement that we're asking you to contemplate this evening, I would call it an umbrella agreement. It
lays out the commitment, as Ms. Bagley noted, of $155 million over the next 5 years to VPRA. It does not specify exactly how we have to make that, exactly where the revenues have to come from. We will be coming back to you as part of our annual budget process each year, laying out exactly how we're going to meet that commitment. The agreement is also not a purchase agreement. We will have individual purchase agreements for each of the property interests that BRE will be getting. And those are laid out right here. One is the Seminary Yard in Alexandria. One is the Broad Run Corridor, the strip next to the main line leading into our Broad Run Yard. The next is permanent easements in the right of way for all of our existing station platforms on the Manassas line. And then the last one is a permanent commuter rail operating easement across all of the Manassas line. So next slide, please. I hope you can see this. This is, again, just to sort of orient you where we are geographically. Alexandria is on the right, Manassas and Broad Run are on the far left, and then the blue line there is the Manassas line running out to the end. And you see the red line there, which is the Fredericksburg line, splitting off in Alexandria, heading down the 95 corridor. So this new yard, our new midday storage facility, will be right there, centrally located, right at where the two lines meet. Then you have the individual stations, Back Lake, Rolling, Burke, Manassas, part of Manassas, and then the Broad Run through track there out to the west. As I noted, the agreement doesn't specify exactly how we're going to do this. It just lays out what the commitment is. We have had a number of ongoing discussions with the FTA Region 3 in Philadelphia, kind of on 3 tracks at once. One is legal, making sure that these purchase agreements, that the appraisals, all of those things are going to be lined up in the way that they need to be. One is NEPA, making sure that we check all the boxes for the environmental clearance. And then one is working here locally with TPB and then also with DRPT, getting the acquisition properly into the TIF and STIF. Once we have all of that lined up, we're looking very good for using a combination of existing and new FTA money on this transaction. So again, if it's a $155 million transaction with 20% local money required, that's $31 million within the balance of that coming out of our FTA money. So we think it's a very favorable way of doing this. So our FY26 budget, which just came before you a couple months ago, in anticipation of this agreement, included a reprogramming of $26 million of our local dedicated BROC money, which had been on the project. That project is stretching out in time a little bit just because of the complexity. We wanted to use those monies now. We're bringing those to the table as the majority of the local contribution needed to do the property transaction. So we'll be assuming that the agreement gets your approval, we would be making that contribution to VPRA here prior to the end of the fiscal year. And with that, Chair, I would be happy to answer questions.
Thanks very much. Sarah, do you want to lead the discussion on this? We call for any questions.
No, I mean, I'm happy to call for questions, but I do I'm pleased that they chose tonight to lead off with that 2050 chart, because I think that's an important framing for this purchase and this investment. This is a long-term investment, towards the future sort of independence of commuter rail in the area and passenger rail in the area. And so if we think about that 5-year funding of $155 million and the effects it will have over the next, 25 years of the service, I think that's the scope and scale of what's being discussed tonight and the long-term impacts. So just, I think that first slide is really a key piece of understanding how this fits into the 2050 vision. for VRE and for rail in the area. But any other questions or comments? I can't necessarily see all the hands due to the camera angle. So Chair Snyder, if you wouldn't mind helping, point people out.
Supervisor.
Yeah, thank you. It feels a little anticlimactic for me only because I've seen this presentation 107 times. Mark and Rich have done such a great job, but this is really a watershed moment in the history of VRE. And Rich and Mark and Steve and the entire VRE team deserve an incredible amount of congratulations for this. This is something we've been trying to do at least the entire time that I've been on the operations board, probably longer. It wasn't working out, and Rich identified an opportunity to revive it, just to his great credit. I think, Mark, maybe just one thing to touch on will be the savings. I want to ask you to put a dollar figure on it, but some of the savings that can come out of this transaction. You touched on the track access payments and seminary yard, but I think it's important for people to understand this isn't just a net new cost of $155 million versus continuation of the status quo. And just say for the status quo, we throughout VRE's history have essentially leased access to the tracks, and it's a challenging negotiation. We can't just pick up the rail cars and move them to some other track. We're captured. That's always a challenging negotiation. Can you speak to just some of the potential?
Yes, absolutely. I think you've already touched on the access, but I would touch on the midday storage. The project that we had previously, the New York Avenue midday storage project, again, as a replacement for where we currently store trains in the Amtrak coach yard. We have known for a long time that we're going to eventually be kicked out of that yard. So we had developed the plans for a very long, narrow yard immediately adjacent to New York Avenue, in between New York Avenue and the Northeast Corridor, a very challenging location, a very expensive location, and working with a partner who can be challenging occasionally too. And when this opportunity, not just the opportunity for VPRA to own the Manassas line, not just the opportunity for Broad Run, but the yard has become like, I think to me, almost like the cornerstone of the deal. We can do this, we can do a larger, in the long run, we can do a larger yard than we could do there. We can do it more quickly. We can do it for less money. And then we will control the operations of that yard as well. If with the New York Avenue yard, we were ultimately going to have that yard be staffed by Amtrak. This will be VRE's yard. I think, I don't want to jump ahead, but I think other operators may want to store their trains at our yard in the future, which will be great. So
That'd be cheap for them. No.
So it is, the capital aspects of this transaction are a game changer, but the operational aspects are too. So
thank you, Walter.
So thank you. I know this has been a plan in the works for many years. My 3 years on the VRE Ops board, I know there's a lot of work being done back then to get to this point. I guess my question is more, Sarah mentioned earlier the 2050, and it's in here in the slides. I know the plans and the long range vision for 2050. This is one piece of that. I guess it would be helpful for me to understand how much of a piece of it is it financially from a capital standpoint. I mean, is this 10%? Is it 40%? What's the relative, to actually go forward with that very ambitious mission of 2050? What is the proportion here?
I don't have a specific proportion off the top of my head. I would say, the property acquisition piece of this was not something that we had maybe contemplated a couple of years ago, but we are making a very positive trade in terms of the cost of the midday storage yard. So that the balance there is actually not that much of a net increase.
Yeah, I guess I would be really interested in having a more focused conversation at NVTC about the 2050 plan. And is that on the agenda at some point, or could that be? Because I mean, this is an important piece of it, but it looks like. May do what you.
So I was gonna say, in fact, we have an annual orientation on VRE coming up in the next couple of months. I just think to confirm, I believe it's in May, but not in April, so even better. And so that is the opportunity to do the dive on the plans and also the relationship of VRE to NVTC. Because obviously we see some things that come here, but not everything that comes. So
Okay. Yeah.
Let me just, I'll give you some level of a comparator there. The existing midday storage project, which was going to be constructed in DC, was exceeding $200 million.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was climbing. And it was, for those that have, this will be a pitch too, for those that have been on a system tour with us, we can show you that site and you'll see how challenging that is. So, albeit the 155 million, again, there's property acquisition in there, but because the seminary yard is an existing freight rail yard, we need to go in there and obviously enhance that yard for our type of operation. But the cost comparison is just, I think that gives you some level of idea there. And I want to emphasize that current midday storage site, the costs continue to go up, not down.
Yeah, I'm not questioning this at all.
Yeah.
It's basically the overall 2050 plan.
Sure.
And how this fits into it. If possible, it'd be great if we could have a briefing.
I can tell you right now, here's our plan. Our plan right now is to, we're gonna do some updating with the operations board in March. Come back to the operations board again in April for some discussion, and to this commission in May on that 2050 plan.
Great, thanks.
So that gives, I'll just tell you that right now. That's what we're doing.
Very much. Yes, Scott.
And on that point, we're gonna have a finance committee meeting that's going to dig into more of this as part of April and March. Is that where we're?
April.
April.
Yeah.
You should come back.
Yeah, Sarah. That's something you want.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, no, I appreciate the sort of the capital and I wanted to bring it full circle again. You know, Rich started his presentation tonight talking about that on-time performance challenge and talking about congestion. So this is another piece of like building rider confidence at a key point in rebuilding ridership. So I think, you know, Rich gives us that report every month and on-time performance continues to be a challenge. And as we welcome back former riders, as we entice new riders, as we, you know, expand a Saturday service, I think that on-time performance piece is a key part of that, and controlling our own, you know, situation, that local control that Rich referenced, I think will be key to delivering on that metric, which matters so much to people, just the reliability of the service. So just thought it was worth kind of bringing that back around to where Rich opened our conversation tonight. And the funding piece that I sort of appreciate. I know Mark, when he's given this presentation, he always talks about how this is a funding agreement, but then there's going to be separate decisions on the specific mechanics of how each piece is being purchased. And I think that's a good thing at the moment, given that there's so many moving parts, and it gives us the flexibility to sort of agree to the big picture, you know, to agree to the funding, but allow flexibility moving forward into, you know, like this movement of the l'enfant piece, you know, as things move around in VRE CIP, as funding sources appear or wax and wane, you know, we'll have the opportunity to craft the particular source of funding to the occasion and to the moment. So I think that's an advantage as well to how the staff at VRE has structured this agreement moving forward. And I hope that's an accurate, you know, I can't see people's faces, but I hope that what I'm getting are sort of nods that that's an accurate, you know, capturing of the structure.
Any other questions? So let me summarize. Here. First of all, this is a critical part of the plan for the future of the RE. Secondly, it's financially prudent based upon other higher expenditures that would be needed to preserve the same functionality. And third, that it will help assure reliable and safe service in the future. I summarized the major points in support of this. And the other question I have is that we're assuming $155 million responsibility here is assigned. So how are we going to meet that? Talk about that.
Very question for the funding.
Sure, so given all the indications we have from the FDA staff, they are very comfortable with all 4 property interests here being eligible to be supported with the FTA money that we have. So we would be looking for 80% of that 155 come out of our either existing monies that we're reprogramming or new monies that come to us. So that would leave $31 million, that would be 20% match. 26 of that 31 million, we're looking from that reprogramming. The rock money that I mentioned off the double pond project, that would leave $5 million with local match that we would need to secure. We are continuing to have discussions with NVTC about do the I-66 outside the Beltway. Provide that last chunk.
Okay, thanks. That's very helpful. So we have a pretty good plan on how to actually implement the liability,
yes,
financial liability we're taking. Okay, that was my only question. I wanted to just some clarity on that.
Sure.
Does anybody have any other questions or concerns? Again, this is very important action for this body to take. Any questions, concerns? Okay, not seeing any. Can I have a motion to approve resolution number 2557 to authorize the VRE CEO to execute the Manassas Line funding agreement with the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority? So
Second.
who moved? Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions?
Mr. Chair.
We have one abstention.
Mr. Chair, so I think I've been here for a few months now, and I believe if Paul Smithberg is not here, I'm a voting member. And as the VPRA chair, I will abstain from this vote.
Quite understand. Thank you. And sir, I understand we'll be voting in favor of the resolution. Okay, that item passes with one abstention. And thank you all very much. Great presentation. I think it clarified a lot of this discussion. The next agenda item is to hear from Tiffany Robinson. Tiffany, anything you'd like to report?
I would just like to let everybody know that you have my director's report in your packet in a little bit different format than you've seen before. February 18th, the Commonwealth Transportation Board met, and I typically provide a director's report to that board as well. So instead of being duplicative, I'm going to share the same report with NVTC. And the only other thing I'll say to piggyback on our earlier conversation is good news to date is that DRPT also has had no interruption in any federal funding. We are making sure we are up to date on all of our drawdowns and reimbursement requests and have continued to receive those to date. So, so far.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your work. Much appreciated. Yes.
Just a request, since you are DPRA, you could tell us how the construction projects are going. Is there anyone else in here from BPRA? Can you tell us monthly? I mean, I got $100 million one in my neighborhood that's causing a lot of issues. But is it on time? You know, and the same one interested in how it's going in DC too.
Sure.
Anything to report?
I would love to be more prepared for you next time, but
Okay.
yes, everything is on track.
Oh, good.
Obviously, Long Bridge is on track to be completed in 2030. It's a long way out, but everything's working for Franconia, Springfield bypass and Long Bridge. We are in the process of finalizing negotiations on final costs. So BPRA, as did VRE, submitted their draft budgets to the CCD last month. However, they didn't come, the executive director opted not to come do a long presentation. He'll come back to CTV probably in April to do that because of the finalized negotiations that are still happening, and those numbers might change a little bit. So he's going to give a full presentation to CTV at that time. But I'm happy to, in my director's report going forward, to give some of those updates here as well.
I just, Mr. Chairman, just want to know if anything's going wrong. That's all I'm doing.
Not that I am aware of. Things are on track, things are moving forward. Contracts are all in place at this point. That's all good news.
You award the bridge too.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, north and south.
Great. Thank you. It's, considering we're running trains, it's good to have them on track as well.
That's right.
So, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Tiffany Robinson, much appreciate your work. Any other questions for Tiffany? Not seeing any. Okay, next item is the executive director's report. Kate.
So actually, before we do that, I actually wanted to go back to Ms. Bagley, because I think she wanted to mention something about some materials that was shared with the commission in advance regarding the attorney. Materials that were sent to the commission prior to the meeting. Bagley, would you like to share?
I just wanted to confirm that everybody, the membership had received the memo regarding general counsel. Given the momentous action item that we just took, I think Mr. McIsaac has finally decided to sort of go out, hopefully on a high note, and has announced his retirement as general counsel for VRE. He also acts in a capacity for NVTC as well. So we are sharing the news with this body that Mr. McIsaac has announced his retirement, although he is going to stay on through the process as we advertise, interview, and find a replacement, which we very much appreciate and appreciate his lengthy tenure with VRE and to this body here, and some of the key moments, including just the creation and the ongoing development of VRE over the years. And so what I just want to make sure everybody knew and had a chance to look at and could ask any questions is the VRE Ops Board created a subcommittee, a recruitment committee that will, and it includes members from both NVTC and PRTC that will review and vet the applications, and through that process recommend a candidate to the full VRE Ops Board, who then hopefully will approve and select that person, and then we will bring that recommendation for that position to NVTC and share it with everybody. So we will obviously, losing Mr. McIsaac is a serious matter for the organization with the years of experience and the relationships that he brings. But we are eager to see the applications that we receive and to begin the process shortly. The hope is that unless this body has any, questions or concerns tonight, to kick off that process essentially next week with a posting.
She has shared Steve McIsaac's considerable expertise over the years, and we would hope that so for to enter into a similar arrangement with us. So, any other questions? We'll have ample opportunity to roast or commend or whatever Steve McIsaac in the future. I know I can't wait. So, but anything else on that, Sarah? Or the Okay, thanks. Any questions or comments on? Okay, so Kate, turning it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And indeed, you do have our monthly newsletter at your desk. It's also going to be distributed online and it's on our website as well. Just reminding of some upcoming meetings that are going forward. Our next commission meeting is April 3rd with the executive committee starting upstairs at 6 p.m. It'll be 7 p.m. for the main meeting here. We do have our joint program advisory committee, which is NVTC and PRTC come together for the 395 Commuter Choice Program. Those as well as they'll be meeting virtually on April 24th at 4:30 p.m. And then the joint Ramada Committee and Legislative Policy Committee will be meeting a little bit later than we anticipated. We're actually going to move it out to May 29th, so we can possibly respond to some of the DMV moves, decisions. And again, that will be upstairs at 2:30. It's crazy to think this far ahead, but for those who are planners, we actually do have a date for our joint legislative forum in December. It's going to be Monday, December 15th. It'll be at our same location as last year, George Mason, here in Arlington campus. We had over 200 people come last year. So, don't worry, we'll save you speed. Thank you for that. So, early it was announced, this college has announced one of our wonderful promotion opportunities we were able to provide to Anne McGrain as a new Deputy Director of Programs and Policy, working directly under Andrew. So congratulations to Anne. And we also we'll have some new staff joining us shortly. We'll be introducing them at our April meeting. Finally, as you always do, we do have our financial reports for both actually December and January, including in the meeting materials. And that concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Kate. Any questions for Kate? Not seeing any. Before we adjourn, is there one to raise any other issue? Okay, not seeing any, let's make a motion to adjourn. Second. Those in favor, so vote. No, any opposed, any abstentions? I don't know.